My friends, when we speak of kindness, we speak of one of the most misunderstood forces in the human psyche. In the outer world, it appears as virtue. It is praised, rewarded, applauded, even demanded. It is treated like moral currency, proof that a person is good, safe, civilized, worthy of love. Yet in the inner world, in the true world of the soul, kindness can become something else entirely. It can become a mask, a spell, a quiet form of self-erasure. And if you are listening to me tonight with a tight feeling in your chest, if you recognize in yourself a compulsive need to be good, to be gentle, to be the one who understands and forgives and carries, then you must be prepared for a harsher truth than you might wish to hear. Very often your kindness is not love. It is fear, and the name of that fear is guilt. Guilt is not merely an emotion. It is a psychic mechanism, a leash placed around the neck of the personality. It is one of the primary ways the unconscious controls the conscious ego when the ego is too weak to face conflict, too afraid to face rejection, too dependent on approval, too hungry for belonging. It is the invisible hand that pushes you back into the same role even after you have outgrown it. It whispers, if you stop giving, you are selfish. It whispers, if you say no, you will hurt them. It whispers, if you protect yourself, you are bad. And because the human being is more terrified of being seen as bad than of being wounded, you obey. You obey quietly. You obey politely. You obey with a smile, and then you call it kindness. But let me say this clearly. Kindness that is born from fear is not kindness. It is submission. It is a bargain made with the shadow. It is the ego trying to purchase safety by sacrificing authenticity. And the payment is always the same: your vitality, your boundaries, your truth, your anger, your instinct, your right to exist without constantly proving you deserve to exist. This is the trap. You see, there is a particular type of person, often sensitive, empathic, attuned, psychologically porous, who becomes a specialist in absorbing the emotional weather of others. Such a person does not merely live among people, they live inside people. They can feel the smallest shift in tone, the slightest tightening of a jaw, the hidden disappointment behind a compliment, the unspoken resentment behind a request. They pick up these signals the way an animal picks up thunder before the storm. And because this sensitivity is rarely understood in childhood, it is not trained into wisdom, it is trained into survival. The child learns, if I sense them early, maybe I can prevent the explosion, or if I stay pleasant, maybe they will not withdraw love, or if I take responsibility for their mood, perhaps I can keep the family together. And so the empathic capacity, which could have become a gift of perception, becomes a tool of control not over others, but over the unbearable anxiety of unpredictability. This is where guilt enters like a priest of the inner temple, because the child is powerless in the outer world. The psyche creates an inner law: I must be good, not good as an ethical ideal, but good as a protective charm. Good becomes safety. Good becomes survival. Good becomes the only identity that guarantees a place in the tribe. And once this identity hardens, It does not remain in childhood. It follows you into adulthood like a ghost wearing your face. So you become the one who always understands, the one who always forgives, the one who always gives one more chance, the one who explains yourself until your throat is dry, the one who tries to heal people who have no intention of healing, the one who thinks love means endurance, the one who feels a strange anxiety when you are not needed, the one who feels ashamed for having needs. And whenever you feel the natural impulse to withdraw, to say no, to choose yourself, guilt rises like a black tide. It says, "How could you?" It says, "You are cruel." It says, "You are ungrateful." It says, "You are abandoning them," and you panic not because you are actually abandoning anyone, but because you are abandoning the role that made you acceptable. In analysis, I have seen guilt operate like a hidden religion. It creates doctrines, it creates commandments, it creates punishments. It creates a sacred image of the self, the helper, the caretaker, the good daughter, the good son, the emotional savior, and it creates a devil image, the selfish one, the cold one, the one who disappoints, the one who takes instead of gives, the one who chooses silence over explanation. The ego clings to the saint image because it fears exile. But the unconscious, my friends, does not tolerate such one-sidedness forever. For the psyche is not a moral institution. It is a living system seeking wholeness, and wholeness is never achieved through goodness alone. Wholeness requires the shadow, it requires aggression, it requires the capacity to refuse, it requires the capacity to disappoint, it requires the capacity to be misunderstood and still remain loyal to one's inner truth. A person who cannot say no is not kind, they are harmless, and harmlessness is not love. It is fear masquerading as virtue. Now, some of you will resist this because your entire identity is built upon being the safe one. You have been praised for it. People have relied on it. You have even secretly relied on it. Because it has given you a certain power, the power of being needed, the power of being the moral superior, the power of being the one who never breaks. Yet, let us not be naive, this kind of kindness often contains hidden resentment, and resentment is one of the clearest signs that your goodness is not free. Where there is free love, there is no bitterness. Where there is free generosity, there is no silent ledger. But where guilt-driven kindness exists, there is often an unconscious accounting. You give and give and give, and then you feel angry that no one gives back. But you cannot ask, you cannot demand, you cannot even admit you want anything, because wanting would break the saint image. And so the anger goes underground. It becomes passive hostility. It becomes fatigue. It becomes a nervous system that cannot rest. It becomes depression without a clear reason. It becomes the strange emptiness you feel after helping everyone. It becomes the cold realization that your kindness did not create intimacy, it created dependency. You may even begin to experience your kindness as a prison. And this is not a poetic metaphor, it is literal psychological imprisonment, because you cannot exit without being punished by guilt, by fear of judgment, by fear of abandonment. So you remain in relationships that shrink you. You remain in roles that suffocate you. You remain in conversations that violate you. And you tell yourself it is noble, but the unconscious is always listening, and it is always compensating. If you live as a saint in your persona, your shadow will begin to rot in the cellar. And what rots does not disappear, it ferments. It becomes poisonous gas that leaks into your life in strange ways. You may start forgetting things. You may become physically ill. You may lose your creativity. You may feel numb. You may experience sudden rage that frightens you. You may find yourself fantasizing about running away, about burning everything down, about becoming cruel, about becoming someone who never cares at all. These fantasies are not evil. They are signals. They are messages from the imprisoned parts of the psyche that have been denied voice. Let us consider the archetypal background of this trap. In many people who fear guilt, the inner mother image is tyrannical, not necessarily the outer mother, though often that is where it begins. The inner mother is the psychic representation of nurturing, belonging, approval, emotional safety. When this mother image is wounded, when love was conditional, when affection was tied to performance, when the child was made responsible for adult emotions, the mother image becomes devouring. She demands, she feeds on compliance, she rewards self-sacrifice, she punishes individuation with shame, and because the child cannot live without the mother's love, the child internalizes the law. If I am not good, I will not be loved. 100. Then later, as an adult, you may not be living with your mother at all, yet you live with her inside your mind. Every boundary you attempt feels like betrayal. Every no feels like murder. Every act of self-protection feels like cruelty. And you wonder why you cannot stop over-giving. You wonder why you feel sick when you disappoint someone. You wonder why you apologize even when you did nothing wrong. You wonder why you feel responsible for other people's moods. You are not dealing with the present. You are dealing with an archetype. This is why kindness becomes a trap, because it is not actually addressed to the person in front of you. It is addressed to the inner mother. It is addressed to the inner tribunal. It is a ritual performed to avoid punishment. And what is the punishment? Often it is not external. Often the punishment is an internal collapse, anxiety, self-hatred, obsessive rumination. The guilt-fearing person does not simply feel bad, they become bad in their own eyes. Their self-image disintegrates. They fall into moral panic. They think, if I set this boundary, I will become selfish forever. This is magical thinking, the kind of thinking found in early childhood and in primitive layers of the psyche. The adult mind knows a boundary is normal, but the child mind inside you believes a boundary is abandonment. So you remain in the trap. I will tell you something that may be difficult, but it is necessary. Many people who are excessively kind are secretly terrified of their own shadow. They have not integrated their aggression. They have not integrated their selfishness. They have not integrated their capacity to take, and because they have not integrated it, they project it onto others. They see selfishness everywhere. They see cruelty everywhere. They see narcissism everywhere. Sometimes they are correct. There are indeed exploitative people. But the reason exploitative people find them so easily is not random. It is because their psyche advertises an open door. I cannot say no. The predator senses it. The manipulator senses it. The emotionally immature person senses it. They do not need a map. They feel the guilt in you the way a shark feels blood in water. And then you think, why do I attract these people? You say, I just have bad luck. No, your unconscious is reenacting an old contract. The contract is, if I endure, I will earn love. This is the contract of the wounded child. And until you tear it up, you will keep signing it with new hands, in new rooms, with new faces. The process of tearing it up is not sweet. It is not polite. It does not feel spiritual at first. It feels like guilt. It feels like grief. It feels like danger. It feels like death. But it is not death. It is individuation. Individuation is the slow and painful birth of the true self out of the false self. And the false self is often made of kindness. It is made of pleasing. It is made of emotional labor. It is made of constant adjustment to other people. It is made of silence where truth should have lived. It is made of smiles where anger should have spoken. It is made of forgiveness where boundaries should have stood. And when the psyche begins individuation, it does something very strange. It removes the reward from the old behaviors. The kindness no longer feels pure. The giving no longer feels joyful. The over-understanding begins to feel humiliating. The constant explaining begins to feel like begging. This is not a failure of your heart. This is the soul withdrawing its energy from the false persona. Some of you are in that stage now. You are still being kind, still being helpful, still being patient, but it feels different. It feels heavy. It feels wrong. You feel a new kind of irritation, not with others, but with yourself. You begin to see how often you betrayed yourself for the sake of keeping peace. You begin to notice the lie in the politeness. You begin to notice how your kindness was a form of self-neglect. This is the psyche awakening. And naturally, as you awaken, guilt attacks you more fiercely, because guilt is the guardian of the old identity. It does not want you to change. It wants you to remain controllable. It wants you to remain predictable. It wants you to remain the one who absorbs everything. And if you begin to pull back, if you begin to say no, if you begin to stop rescuing, the guilt will not simply whisper, it will scream. In that scream, you will hear ancient voices. You will hear the disappointed parent. You will hear the siblings who relied on you. You will hear the partner who trained you. You will hear the collective voice of society that says, a good person sacrifices, and you will confuse these voices with conscience. But conscience is not the same as conditioning. True conscience is quiet. It is precise. It does not dramatize. It does not shame. It does not manipulate. True conscience is the inner compass of the self. Conditioning is loud. It is emotional. It is punishing. It is catastrophic. Conditioning says, if you don't help them, you are evil. Conscience says, if you help them by betraying yourself, you are lying. These are different spirits. What you must learn, if you wish to escape the trap, is to differentiate guilt from conscience. Guilt says you are responsible for everyone's feelings. Conscience says you are responsible for your integrity. Guilt says you must keep harmony. Conscience says you must keep truth. Guilt says you must be liked. Conscience says you must be whole. And wholeness, my friends, often looks like cruelty to those who benefited from your self-abandonment. This is why the transformation is so terrifying. When you stop being guilt-driven, people around you will often become confused. Some will become angry. Some will attempt to provoke you back into the old role. Some will accuse you of changing. and they will be correct. You are changing. You are withdrawing the psychic energy that once made you useful to their unconscious needs. Here, the archetype of the martyr often appears. The martyr is the one who suffers to maintain meaning. If you have lived as a martyr, you have believed consciously or unconsciously that suffering makes you valuable. That pain proves your goodness. That endurance earns love. But the martyr archetype is dangerous because it offers identity without freedom. It offers a role that is socially praised, yet it slowly kills the self. It is one of the most seductive traps for sensitive people because it allows them to avoid the terrifying task of self-assertion while still feeling morally superior. Yet the unconscious does not care about moral superiority. The unconscious wants life, and when the unconscious wants life, it will eventually sabotage the martyr. It will make them collapse. It will make them burn out. It will make them angry. It will make them lose compassion. It will make them withdraw from everyone. And then the martyr will think, I have become cold. No, you have become honest. You have become depleted by a false virtue. The warmth you lost was not love. It was adrenaline. It was fear. To be truly kind, one must be free. Kindness is only real when it is chosen, not when it is compelled. If you cannot refuse, your giving is not virtue, it is obligation. Obligation is not love. Obligation is a chain, and many of you, if you examine honestly, are not kind people. You are imprisoned people, performing kindness to avoid guilt. This is not condemnation, it is diagnosis, and diagnosis is the beginning of liberation. So what must happen? The first thing is this: you must make contact with the part of you that feels guilty for existing. Not guilty for doing wrong, but guilty for existing, guilty for having needs, guilty for taking space, guilty for resting, guilty for wanting to be cared for. This guilt is the deepest. It is existential. It comes from early life, where your natural self caused inconvenience, caused emotional reaction, caused tension. So you learn to shrink. In dreams, this often appears as being in a house where you must not make noise, where you must walk carefully, where someone is sleeping and you fear waking them, or you may dream of carrying something fragile, like a glass object, terrified it will break. This is the psyche showing you the burden of vigilance. The guilt-fearing person lives as if reality is fragile and they are to blame if it cracks. That is not love. That is trauma. When you begin to loosen this, you will feel like you are breaking the glass. You will feel like you are waking the sleeping giant. You will feel like you are doing something forbidden. The body will react. The heart will race. The stomach will tighten. You will want to retreat into old politeness. This is where courage begins, not heroic courage, but inner courage, the willingness to tolerate guilt without obeying it. Because guilt is not a commandment from God, it is a sensation in the nervous system. It is a psychic reflex, and like any reflex, it can be retrained. But first you must endure its discomfort long enough for the psyche to learn that the world does not end when you disappoint someone. This is the very essence of individuation, the willingness to bear the tension of opposites, to be both loving and firm, to be both compassionate and boundaried, to be both kind and capable of refusal. The integrated person is not one-sided. They are not the saint. They are not the devil. They are both, and that is why they are whole. And when you become whole, you will discover something shocking. Many of the people you called loved ones did not love you. They loved your guilt. They loved your compliance. They loved your availability. They loved your emotional labor. They loved your forgiveness without accountability. They loved your kindness as a resource. And when the resource withdraws, they reveal what was truly there. This revelation is painful, but it is a sacred pain. It is the pain of waking up. If you are ready to wake up, we must continue deeper, for the trap of guilt is not merely personal, it is archetypal, it is collective, and it is ancient. And so the revelation arrives not as a dramatic thunderbolt, but as a quiet, almost shameful noticing. You begin to notice that your kindness has been treated like an entitlement. You begin to notice that the moment you are tired, the moment you are unavailable, the moment you do not reply fast enough, the moment you do not soften the truth, a strange coldness appears in the other. You begin to sense that their affection was never truly for you, but for the function you performed in their psyche. And this is why guilt is such a powerful chain. It keeps you volunteering for roles that starve you, because to stop would mean to face the terrifying possibility that you were never loved for your soul, only for your usefulness. Now, in the psyche, this kind of painful noticing marks an important threshold. It is the threshold between the persona and the self. Most people live behind a persona, a social mask shaped by adaptation. There is nothing wrong with adaptation. The human being must adapt to survive among others. But there comes a point where adaptation becomes self-betrayal, and the guilt-driven kind person often has one of the most polished personas in the room. They appear safe, wise, gentle, spiritually mature, endlessly understanding. They are often admired for their composure, yet behind that composure is a battlefield. The battlefield is between the conscious ego that wants peace and the unconscious that wants truth. Because you cannot become whole by being endlessly agreeable, you cannot become whole by being endlessly forgiving. You cannot become whole by being endlessly available. Wholeness requires friction. It requires that you collide with the world. It requires that you disappoint and survive the disappointment. It requires that you see the hatred in another's eyes and still not return to begging. It requires that you tolerate being misunderstood without compulsively correcting. And this is why guilt is so poisonous. Guilt prevents the collision. It keeps you smoothing every edge. It keeps you anesthetizing every conflict. It keeps you living as a diplomat even when a warrior is required. Many of you confuse peacekeeping with love, but peacekeeping is often a trauma response. It is a strategy developed in an environment where conflict was dangerous. In such an environment, the child becomes a negotiator, a mood reader, an emotional caretaker. They learn to detect storms. They learn to anticipate needs. They learn to sacrifice their truth for harmony. And because this strategy once saved them, it becomes sacred. Later, when the adult attempts to set a boundary, the unconscious interprets it as threat. It releases guilt and fear, because in the old environment, saying no would have meant losing love, losing safety, losing belonging. So the adult is not merely afraid of guilt, they are afraid of exile. They are afraid of emotional death. This is why the guilt feels so enormous. It is not proportionate to the present situation. It is proportional to the childhood terror stored in the body. Here we must speak about something many of you avoid: aggression. Not violence aggression. In the language of the psyche, aggression is life force. It is the energy that allows the individual to differentiate, to push away, to separate, to say, this is me and that is not me. The guilt-driven, kind person has often repressed aggression so deeply that they no longer recognize it as their own. They fear it. They associate it with being bad, being cruel, being like the people who hurt them. So they attempt to live as pure light, pure gentleness, pure patience, but in doing so they become spiritually lopsided. They become psychologically vulnerable. For what you repress does not disappear, it becomes shadow, and the shadow is not merely the dark side of the personality. The shadow is everything you have disowned. It is all your unlived life. It is all your forbidden impulses, all your unacceptable truths, all your denied instincts. For the guilt-driven person, the shadow contains the very energies that would save them: selfishness, anger, refusal, distance, coldness, indifference, the capacity to not care. Yes, even the capacity to not care is part of wholeness, because if you care about everything, you will be controlled by everything. Now consider what happens when such a person encounters someone who has no guilt. The guilt-driven person is often fascinated and horrified by those who can say no easily, those who can ignore messages, those who can disappoint without collapsing, those who can be indifferent. They may call such people narcissistic or cold or selfish. Sometimes that is true, but sometimes what they are seeing is simply integrated aggression, a developed boundary, a self that is not enslaved by external approval. The guilt-driven person envies this unconsciously, because it represents freedom, yet they attack it morally, because morally condemning what you envy is one of the oldest tricks of the ego. And so the psyche remains divided. The persona is saintly. The shadow is furious. If you want evidence of this fury, look at the fantasies that arise in you when you are exhausted. Look at the moments you imagine disappearing, becoming unreachable, leaving everyone behind. Look at the sudden bitterness that surfaces when someone asks you for more. Look at the secret pleasure you feel when you finally disappoint someone. These are not signs you are becoming evil. They are signs you are becoming whole. The shadow is not asking you to be cruel. It is asking you to stop being a slave. But the guilt-driven person often cannot differentiate between cruelty and boundaries. This is a profound psychological confusion, because they were trained to believe that self-protection is harm. If your family system only functioned when you overgave, then your boundary would indeed have felt like harm to them. But it was not harm. It was simply the end of their control. This is why, when you begin to pull back, you will meet resistance. Sometimes the resistance will be subtle: silence, withdrawal, disappointment, a sigh that says, I guess you don't care anymore. Sometimes it will be overt: anger, accusation, moral condemnation. They will use the language that has always controlled you: guilt. They will say, after all I've done for you. They will say, you've changed. They will say, "You're selfish." They will say, "You're cold," and your body will respond as if a knife has been placed at your throat. Because that language does not merely describe you, it activates the internal mother, the internal tribunal, the internal exile fear. This is why you must understand. Manipulative guilt does not work because the other person is powerful. It works because you are conditioned. So then, what is the cure? The cure is not to become unkind. The cure is to become conscious. Consciousness is always the beginning of liberation. When you become conscious, you begin to see the mechanism, you begin to recognize the script, you begin to recognize the old contract, and once you recognize it, you can begin to break it. But breaking it feels like committing a crime. It feels like sacrilege. This is why the guilt-driven person often describes boundary setting in moral terms rather than psychological terms. They say, "I feel bad." They say, "I feel guilty." They say, "I feel like I'm doing something wrong." Yet often they have done nothing wrong. They have simply done something new. The psyche confuses newness with danger, because in the past, newness may indeed have been dangerous. Now let us enter the symbolic dimension, because the psyche speaks most truthfully in symbols. Imagine, for a moment, a person walking through life carrying a lantern. The lantern is their kindness. It illuminates rooms, it warms others, it offers safety, but behind them, attached to their waist, is a chain, and on the chain is a heavy iron ball. The ball is guilt. They do not speak of it. They do not show it. They have become skilled at moving with it. They even believe it is part of them. They have forgotten that it was attached. When they attempt to rest, the ball pulls them forward. When they attempt to say no, the ball drags them back into old behavior. When they attempt to choose themselves, the ball makes them feel heavy, sinful, shameful, and what do? They lift the lantern higher. They become even kinder. They become even more forgiving. They become even more generous, as if kindness can compensate for the crime of selfhood, but the ball remains. This is the tragedy. The more kind they become, the more trapped they feel, because kindness has become an attempt to outrun guilt, but you cannot outrun the shadow. The shadow runs with you. Now, in analysis, when such a person begins to individuate, the first thing that happens is not empowerment. It is disillusionment. The lantern begins to flicker. The persona begins to crack. They begin to see that their kindness was not entirely pure. They begin to see that it contained a hidden motive: to be safe, to be loved, to be needed, to be morally superior, to avoid abandonment, to avoid conflict, to avoid shame. This realization is painful because it destroys the ego's idealized self-image. But it is necessary. Without this destruction, there can be no integration. For what you must become is not a better person. You must become a whole person. And wholeness means you are no longer seduced by being the good one. You are no longer addicted to moral identity. You are no longer controlled by the need to appear kind. You become capable of kindness and capable of refusal. You become capable of love and capable of separation. You become capable of compassion and capable of cold truth. This is the integrated human. Now we must speak about a particularly cruel illusion, that being kind guarantees safety. Many of you still secretly believe this. You still believe that if you remain kind enough, patient enough, understanding enough, you will not be hurt. This belief is the child's attempt to control fate. It is magical thinking. It is also deeply tragic because it keeps you blaming yourself when harm comes. When someone betrays you, you ask, "What did I do wrong?" When someone discards you, you ask, "Why wasn't I enough?" When someone becomes cruel, you ask, "How can I fix this?" The guilt tells you that your goodness should have prevented the pain, and if it did not, then your goodness was insufficient. But the truth is harsher and freer. Your goodness never controlled them. Your kindness never controlled their shadow. Your patience never healed their wounds. Your understanding never matured their character. You were not God. You were simply a person sacrificing yourself to an illusion of control. And perhaps this is the deepest function of guilt. It gives you the fantasy of control. If everything is your responsibility, then everything is also your power. The guilt-driven person would rather believe they are responsible for everything than accept the terrifying reality that others choose their behavior, and that sometimes love does not protect you. So guilt becomes a way to avoid helplessness. It says, if I just do better, I can prevent abandonment. But that is not love. That is bargaining. Now let us consider another archetype, the Redeemer. Many guilt-driven kind people unconsciously identify with the Redeemer archetype. They believe their purpose is to heal others, to save others, to redeem broken people through love. This can appear noble, spiritual, even holy, yet psychologically it is often a way to avoid one's own shadow. If you focus on redeeming others, you do not have to face your own wounds. If you focus on saving someone, you do not have to save yourself. If you become the healer, you do not have to become the one who needs healing. But the Redeemer archetype becomes pathological when it is driven by guilt. Then you are not helping because you freely choose to help. You are helping because you feel responsible for their pain, and that responsibility becomes a burden that crushes you. Worse, it keeps the other person infantilized, because as long as you carry them, they do not have to walk. The unconscious sees this dynamic clearly. It often produces dreams where you are carrying a heavy person on your back, or dragging something enormous, or trying to save someone drowning while you yourself cannot breathe. These dreams are not poetic, they are diagnostic. They show you that your kindness is killing you. Now, some of you will say, "But if I stop helping, I will become selfish." Here we must redefine selfishness. There is immature selfishness, yes, greed, to exploitation, indifference, but there is also mature selfishness. Mature selfishness is self-respect. It is the ability to prioritize one's own life force. It is the refusal to be used. It is the decision to stop paying for other people's dysfunction with your health. Mature selfishness is not evil. It is individuation. The guilt-driven person must learn mature selfishness. They must learn to say, "I am not available for this." They must learn to endure the discomfort of someone's disappointment. They must learn to watch someone be unhappy and not rush to rescue them. This is one of the most difficult tasks for the empathic person, because their nervous system is trained to interpret others' unhappiness as danger. But in adulthood, Not every unhappy person is a danger. Often their unhappiness is simply the consequence of their own choices. And if you rescue them from consequence, you become an accomplice to their stagnation. Here is another harsh truth. Sometimes your kindness is not kindness. It is interference. It is you trying to regulate your own anxiety by regulating their emotions. You cannot tolerate their discomfort, so you rush to soothe, but their discomfort may be necessary for growth. Their discomfort may be the very thing that would wake them up, and you, out of guilt, rob them of that wake-up call. So the individuation of the kind person requires a new capacity, the capacity to witness suffering without taking ownership of it. This is compassion without enmeshment. This is love without self-sacrifice. This is the quiet maturity of the integrated soul. Now let us go even deeper. Where does guilt truly come from? Often it comes from introjection. Introjection is when the child takes in the parent's voice as their own. If the parent was disappointed, the child becomes disappointed in themselves. If the parent was anxious, the child becomes anxious on their behalf. If the parent was fragile, the child becomes careful. If the parent was shaming, the child becomes their own shamer. And later, you call it your personality. But it is not personality, it is possession. The guilt-driven person is often possessed by an inner judge that does not belong to them. It is an internalized voice of the family system. The culture, the collective moral code, and the first step to liberation is to realize not every voice in your mind is you. When you hear the guilt voice say, you must reply, ask, whose voice is this? When you hear it say, you must be polite, ask, whose voice is this? When you hear it say, you must not upset them, ask, whose voice is this? If you listen carefully, you will often recognize someone, a mother, a father, a teacher, a religious authority, a wounded caretaker, a family atmosphere. Once you recognize the source, the guilt loses some power, because it is no longer an absolute truth. It becomes a psychological artifact. And then you begin the true work. You begin to build an inner authority. An authority not based on being good, but based on being true. This is where many of you will feel a terrifying emptiness. Because if you are not the kind one, who are you? If you are not the helper, what is your value? If you are not needed, do you exist? This emptiness is the death of the false self. It is the void before the self emerges. Many people retreat here. They go back to kindness as addiction. They go back to overgiving. They go back to roles. Because the void is frightening. It contains the unknown. It contains loneliness. It contains the truth that you must build your life from a new center. But if you stay in the void long enough, something extraordinary happens. You begin to feel a new kind of energy. It is quieter than anxiety. It is steadier than approval. It feels like gravity. It feels like inner weight. It feels like you are no longer floating in other people's opinions. This is the beginning of selfhood. And with this selfhood comes a new relationship to guilt. You still feel guilt, but it no longer controls you. You can feel it and not obey it. You can hear the accusations and not collapse. You can disappoint and remain intact. This is power, not outer power, but inner power, the kind that cannot be taken from you. Now, as you develop this, you will notice another phenomenon. Your kindness becomes rarer. You are no longer kind to everyone. You are selective. You become discerning. You begin to ask, is this person worthy of my care? This question will shock your old self, because the old self believed kindness must be unconditional. But unconditional kindness is often unconscious. It is indiscriminate. It is childish. Mature kindness is not indiscriminate. It is wise. It knows that giving to the wrong person is not virtue, it is self-harm. So you begin to reserve your kindness for those who can receive it without exploiting it. You become less available to those who demand. You become less responsive to those who manipulate. You become less interested in saving. You become more interested in truth. And truth, my friends, is the foundation of love. If there is to be a continuation, it must go further into the initiation that occurs when the guilt-driven kind person finally becomes dangerous, not in cruelty, but in clarity, when they stop performing goodness and begin embodying wholeness. When the guilt-driven kind person begins to embody wholeness, something in the psyche undergoes an initiation. It is not simply a lifestyle change. It is not merely learning to say no. It is a psychic rite of passage, a movement from the moral child into the individuated adult. And like all initiations, it is accompanied by fear, by loss, by symbolic death, because you are not only changing your behavior, you are breaking a covenant that your unconscious once considered sacred. This is why, the moment you become clearer, life often feels more dangerous, not less. Your nervous system does not interpret clarity as safety at first. It interprets it as exposure. For years, your kindness was a shield. It was a camouflage that allowed you to move through relationships without provoking the aggression of others, without inviting abandonment, without forcing confrontation. Now, as you remove the shield, you feel naked, you feel like a target. The old part of you says, if you stop being kind, you will be attacked. And in some cases, it is correct, because certain people only tolerated you when you were convenient. So the first harsh consequence of wholeness is this: your relationships reveal themselves. And what reveals itself is not always pleasant. You begin to see who loved you and who used you. You begin to see who respected you and who managed you. You begin to see who was truly intimate with you and who was merely consuming you. The empathic person, when they pull their energy back, becomes like a lamp that exposes hidden stains on the walls. And those who benefited from the old darkness hate the lamp. This is why so many sensitive people retreat back into kindness. They interpret conflict as failure, as proof they have become bad. But conflict is not proof of badness. Conflict is proof of differentiation. If you have lived as a ghost, always adapting, always pleasing, then your first act of selfhood will naturally create friction, because you are now taking up space, and those who were accustomed to walking through you will suddenly hit a wall. This wall is not cruelty, it is boundary. But to those who have exploited you, boundary feels like violence. They will dramatize it. They will moralize it. They will accuse you of what they themselves have done to you. This is projection, and projection is the language of the unconscious. When you say no, they may suddenly call you selfish. Yet selfishness was always theirs. It simply hid behind your giving. When you stop over-explaining, they may call you cold. Yet coldness was always their inability to truly meet you. It simply hid behind your warmth. When you withdraw your emotional labor, they may call you cruel, yet cruelty was always their entitlement. It simply hid behind your guilt. Now the mask drops. Now the truth surfaces. In the psyche, this moment often activates the archetype of the witch. The witch is the shadow image of the good woman, the good healer, the good caretaker. In patriarchal and family systems, the woman or the sensitive person who stops serving becomes the witch. She becomes dangerous. She becomes feared. She becomes blamed. The same happens inwardly. The moment you become boundaried, the inner tribunal may call you wicked. It may call you heartless. It may say, you have become like them. This is the old moral conditioning struggling against individuation. But the witch archetype is not evil. She is power reclaimed. She is the one who refuses to be devoured. She is the one who says, no more. She is the one who withdraws nourishment from the entitled. She is the one who burns illusions. She is the one who no longer offers her life force to those who have not earned it. In the psyche, she is necessary. Without her, the kind person remains prey. Now, what does it mean to become prey? It means you become predictable, and predictability is the secret doorway through which manipulation enters. The guilt-driven person is predictable because guilt ensures compliance. If I know you will feel bad, I can control you. If I know you cannot tolerate my disappointment, I can move you like a puppet. If I know you cannot bear the thought of being disliked, I can extract endless labor from you. This is why guilt is such a coveted tool in immature relationships. It is not merely an emotion, it is a handle. So the individuation of the guilt-driven person requires something radical. You must become less predictable. This frightens you because you were trained to equate predictability with goodness. But psychologically, predictability in relationships often means you are scripted. You are playing a role. You are not responding from the self. You are responding from conditioning. When you become unpredictable, not erratic, but self-led manipulative people lose access to you. They can no longer use your guilt as a handle. This is why your transformation feels like becoming dangerous. You are no longer easily controlled. You are no longer easily coerced. You are no longer easily seduced by moral accusation. You are no longer easily baited into emotional labor. You become someone who can say, I hear your disappointment, and I still choose myself. For the old you, this sentence would feel like murder. For the individuated you, it feels like life. And yet, as you step into this life, you must face a paradox. The guilt-driven person often believes that if they stop giving, they will lose love, and indeed, they may lose certain relationships. But what they call love was often bondage, and bondage is not love. So the loss, though painful, is a purification. It is the psyche removing what cannot survive truth. This is why I say, not every breakup is tragedy. Some are initiation. Not every ending is failure. Some are the soul's refusal to remain unconscious. And when you leave the old roles behind, you are not losing love, you are losing dependency, you are losing a false belonging, you are losing a familiar cage. But the human psyche hates cages that it already knows. It prefers familiar suffering to unfamiliar freedom. This is why so many remain trapped. They say, "At least I know how to survive here." Yet survival is not life. The self wants life. Now we must speak of the most dangerous deception of all, spiritualized guilt. Many of you have learned to turn guilt into morality and morality into spiritual identity. You say, "I must be kind because I am spiritually mature," or "I must forgive because that is enlightenment," or "I must sacrifice because love is sacrifice." And thus you sanctify your own imprisonment. You call your trauma virtue. You call your fear compassion. You call your inability to set boundaries love. But these are not spiritual truths. They are psychological defenses. True spirituality has teeth. It does not demand self-annihilation. True spirituality does not require you to abandon yourself to prove you are good. True spirituality is the alignment of the self with the deepest truth, and the deepest truth is never, always give. The deepest truth is, be whole. Sometimes wholeness gives, sometimes wholeness refuses, sometimes wholeness stays, sometimes wholeness leaves, sometimes wholeness forgives. Sometimes wholeness demands consequence. Sometimes wholeness speaks softly. Sometimes wholeness becomes silent, and silence, my friends, is often the deepest boundary of all. The guilt-driven kind person fears silence because silence removes negotiation, it removes pleading, it removes the performative goodness. Silence says, "I will no longer enter the courtroom of your opinion." Silence says, "I will not argue for my right to exist." Silence says, "I am no longer available for this story." Silence is terrifying for the old personality because it feels like abandonment. Yet, psychologically, silence is often the first act of self-respect. In many individuals, the fear of guilt is actually the fear of separation. And separation is the birth canal of individuation. To individuate, you must separate from the collective mind. You must separate from family expectations. You must separate from the internalized parent. You must separate from the role others assigned you. You must separate from the identity that gained approval. This separation is not hatred. It is not revenge. It is the natural process of becoming. But if you were raised in an enmeshed system, separation feels like betrayal. The system taught you that your individuality is selfish. It taught you that your needs are burdensome. It taught you that harmony matters more than truth. So your psyche now equates separation with guilt, yet without separation, there is no self. There is only role. This is why the guilt-driven person must pass through what I call the desert. The desert is the stage where your old identity dies. But your new identity has not yet formed. It feels lonely. It feels empty. It feels like no one understands you. It feels like you have lost your warmth. It feels like you have become strange to yourself. Many panic in the desert and run back to the old life. They start overgiving again. They start apologizing again. They start explaining again. They start rescuing again. They say, "I've changed too much." But the truth is, you are simply between selves. In mythology, this is the underworld journey. The hero leaves the village, enters darkness, meets monsters, loses old skin, finds hidden treasure, returns transformed. Your monsters are not external demons. They are internal voices, the shamer, the judge, the guilty child, the anxious caretaker, and the treasure is not approval. It is inner authority. Inner authority is the capacity to say, I decide what is right for me, not as rebellion, not as ego inflation, but as alignment with the self. When inner authority emerges, guilt changes. It becomes smaller, it becomes more specific. It no longer dominates your entire being. You can feel guilt without being swallowed. You can examine it rather than obey it. You can ask, is this guilt telling me I violated my values? Or is it telling me I violated someone's expectations? This question is one of the most liberating in psychological life, because much of what you call guilt is merely the pain of disappointing others. That pain is not evidence you did wrong. It is evidence you were conditioned to equate love with compliance. Now we must address something even more unsettling. The guilty kind person often uses kindness as a form of control. This will shock you, because you consider yourself the opposite of controlling, but psychological truth is often paradoxical. When you cannot openly assert your needs, you begin to assert them indirectly. You give so that others will feel obligated. You help so that others will not leave. You forgive so that others will stay close. You rescue so that others will need you. This is not conscious manipulation. It is unconscious strategy, but it is still control, and the unconscious knows it. This is why your kindness may feel hollow. This is why you may feel secretly resentful, because on some level your psyche knows you were not simply giving, you were negotiating. You were trying to secure love through goodness. You were trying to control abandonment through sacrifice. You were trying to control conflict through agreement. And when these strategies fail, you collapse. So, individuation requires that you stop controlling love. You must accept the terrifying freedom of others. You must accept that someone can leave. You must accept that someone can misunderstand. You must accept that someone can judge you, and you must survive it without returning to self-betrayal. This is the moment the psyche becomes truly adult. The child believes love must be earned. The adult learns love must be chosen. The child believes boundaries are cruelty. The adult learns boundaries are truth. The child believes guilt is conscience. The adult learns guilt is often conditioning. The child believes kindness guarantees safety. The adult learns kindness must be free. Now, as this adult self emerges, your dreams may change. You may dream of closing doors. You may dream of locking gates. You may dream of building walls, not as prison, but as sacred boundaries. You may dream of a wild animal appearing: wolf, lion, snake. These animals represent instinct. Instinct is what you lost when you became guilt-driven. Instinct is the natural intelligence of the psyche. It knows when something is wrong. It knows when someone is unsafe. It knows when you are being exploited. But guilt has often silenced instinct, because instinct is not polite. Instinct does not explain. Instinct simply reacts. The return of instinct is the return of self. And when instinct returns, you become less tolerant of manipulation. You become less interested in pleasing. You begin to sense danger earlier. You begin to feel disgust where you once felt compassion, and you may feel ashamed of this disgust because it is not kind. But disgust is not moral. Disgust is protective. It signals what is poisonous. So now you must learn to trust what you feel without immediately moralizing it. Your old habit was to moralize everything. Is it kind? Is it good? Will it hurt them? The new question becomes, is it true? Is it aligned? Is it healthy? Is it respectful of my life force? This shift is enormous. It is the difference between living for approval and living for integrity. But do not romanticize this stage, because when you begin to live for integrity, you will grieve. You will grieve the years you lost. You will grieve the love you begged for. You will grieve the self you abandoned. You will grieve the child who had to become kind to survive. This grief is sacred. It is the mourning of the false self. Without it, you cannot fully leave the old identity behind. And with grief often comes anger, not the explosive anger of violence, but the clear anger of awakening. Anger says, this was not okay. Anger says, I deserved better. Anger says, I will not let this happen again. Many guilt-driven people fear anger because they associate it with harm. But anger is the psyche's immune response. It is what arises when boundaries were violated. It is not the enemy. Suppressed anger becomes depression, fatigue, numbness. Integrated anger becomes clarity. So when you feel anger rising, do not panic. Do not shame yourself. Ask what it protects. Ask what it reveals. Ask what truth you have been swallowing. The anger is the self speaking after years of silence. It is the self returning from exile. Now, in this stage, you may begin to notice something. Your compassion becomes sharper. You are no longer compassionate in a soft, melting way. You become compassionate in a fierce way. You can see someone suffering and still refuse to rescue them. You can love someone and still leave them. You can understand someone's wound and still demand accountability. This is not cruelty. It is mature love. It is the love of the self, not the love of the martyr. For the martyr loves through suffering. The self loves through truth. And as you embody this truth, the guilt voice will attempt its final tactic. It will accuse you of becoming heartless. It will show you images of yourself as cold, isolated, alone. It will whisper, you will end up with no one. It will threaten you with loneliness. This is the deepest fear for many of you, because you were trained that belonging depends on serving. But here is the paradox that reveals the hidden blessing. Loneliness is often the price of becoming real, not permanent loneliness, but temporary solitude. The solitude you must enter to meet yourself. The solitude that cleanses your psyche of external noise. The solitude where you learn what you actually want, what you actually feel, what you actually value. If you cannot tolerate solitude, you will always be controlled, because the manipulator's greatest weapon is your fear of being alone. If you can tolerate solitude, you become unhookable, and that is freedom. So the initiation continues until you reach a point where guilt no longer dictates your behavior. It may still appear, it may still sting, but it no longer rules. You can feel it and still remain loyal to yourself. You can be misunderstood and still remain whole. You can disappoint and still remain loving. This is individuation. This is the emergence of the self. And when the self emerges, kindness returns, but transformed. It is no longer a trap. It is no longer a shield. It is no longer a bargain. It becomes a gift. It becomes something you give because you want to, not because you fear guilt. It becomes something rooted in abundance, not in anxiety. It becomes something that does not drain you because it is aligned with your life force. It becomes something that does not require you to vanish. In the next movement, we must confront the final layer, the guilt that arises not from others, but from your own psyche. As you become someone you never thought you were allowed to be, the person who chooses themselves without apology. The final layer is always the most intimate because it is no longer about other people at all. It is not about their disappointment, their anger, their withdrawal, their accusations. It is about the moment you stand alone with yourself and discover that even if the outer world applauded your freedom, your inner world might still punish you for it. This is the deepest guilt, the guilt that comes from the unconscious loyalty you have carried for years, perhaps decades, to a version of yourself that was built to survive rather than to live. You see, the psyche has a strange devotion to its own history. It forms vows in childhood that the adult mind never consciously remembers. These vows are not spoken aloud, yet they govern entire destinies. A child looks at a fragile mother and decides, "I will never cause you pain." A child watches a father withdraw love and decides, "I will never disappoint you." A child senses tension in the home and decides, "I will become harmless." A child experiences rejection and decides, "I must earn my place by being good." These are not moral principles. They are survival contracts, and the unconscious treats them as sacred. So when you begin to choose yourself, truly choose yourself, without performance, without apology, it does not feel like simple change. It feels like betrayal of a vow. And the psyche, like all ancient systems, punishes betrayal. It punishes with guilt. This is why the kind person who finally becomes free often feels a surprising shame, as if they have done something immoral, even when they have simply done something healthy. They set a boundary, and afterwards they feel sick. They stop rescuing, and afterwards they cannot sleep. They refuse an unfair demand, and afterwards their mind torments them with self-accusation. Nothing happened externally. Yet, internally, it feels like the world has ended. This is the old contract being challenged. This is the orphan child inside you crying out, "If you stop serving, you will lose love, a weight." And now we arrive at the most important truth of all. Much of your kindness was an attempt to avoid becoming the orphan again. The guilt-driven person carries an orphan wound, whether visible or hidden. Sometimes the parents were present, yet emotionally absent. Sometimes love was given, yet with conditions. Sometimes affection existed, yet it was unstable, unpredictable, linked to performance. In such an environment, the child's psyche experiences a form of abandonment, even when no one physically leaves. The child learns that emotional safety is not guaranteed, and because the child cannot bear the terror of being alone, the child creates a strategy: become indispensable, become good, become needed, become the one who never causes trouble. This is the child's attempt to make abandonment impossible. But abandonment cannot be controlled, and so the adult continues the strategy, hoping that if they are kind enough, the orphan will never return. Yet the orphan always returns, not because you are failing, but because the orphan is part of your psyche that has never been truly met. So the final layer of guilt is the guilt of leaving the orphan behind. It is the guilt of no longer living for that child's survival contract. It is the guilt of no longer organizing your entire life around preventing pain. It is the guilt of becoming someone who can tolerate discomfort, loneliness, rejection, and still remain whole. This is the adult self emerging, but the child inside you does not immediately trust the adult. The child says, "This is unsafe." The child says, "Go back." The child says, "Be good again." The child says, "Please them again." The child says, "Explain again." The child says, "Fix it." Has O's. Here is where many sabotage their own transformation. They feel guilt and mistake it for truth. They feel shame and assume they have done wrong. They confuse the child's panic with moral reality, and so they return to the old identity. They apologize, they overgive, they send long messages, they soften the boundary, they rescue again, they perform kindness again, and the child feels temporary relief because the old ritual has been restored. But the adult self retreats, and the psyche becomes trapped in repetition. Individuation demands that you do something different. You must become the parent to your own orphan. This is not sentimental. It is psychological necessity. You must learn to say inwardly, yes. You feel guilty? Yes. You feel afraid? Yes. You think we will be abandoned, but I am here. I will not abandon you, and I will not sacrifice us to keep others comfortable. This inner dialogue is the beginning of reparenting. It is the moment you stop using outer relationships to soothe inner abandonment. It is the moment you begin building an inner home. For many sensitive people, kindness was never truly about others. It was about building an illusion of safety around the orphan. The orphan believed, if they are happy, I am safe, so you made them happy. The orphan believed, if they need me, they won't leave, so you made yourself indispensable. The orphan believed, if I never hurt them, they will love me, so you became harmless. The orphan believed, if I am perfect, I will belong, so you became anxious, and you called it kindness. True kindness only becomes possible when the orphan is no longer steering the ship. Now, as you reclaim leadership, your psyche will force you to confront another shadow, the shadow of superiority. Many guilt-driven kind people secretly believe they are morally better than others. They do not speak it. They may not even consciously think it, but it exists as an unconscious compensation. I suffer more, therefore I am purer. I forgive more, therefore I am above them. I endure more, therefore I am good. This hidden superiority is not evil, it is compensation for powerlessness. It is how the psyche attempts to create dignity inside suffering. Yet superiority creates a subtle prison, because if you are the good one, you can never become fully human, you can never admit envy, you can never admit selfish desire, you can never admit hatred. You can never admit that sometimes you want to be cruel. You can never admit that sometimes you want to take without giving. These impulses are normal parts of the human shadow, but the saint persona forbids them. So they remain underground, and the person remains divided. The final phase of liberation requires humility. The humility to admit you are not only kind, you are also selfish, you are also angry, You are also capable of harm. You are also capable of indifference. You are also capable of pleasure at another's downfall. You are also capable of spite. Yes, and to admit this does not make you worse. It makes you honest. And honesty is the soil of integration. When you accept your full humanity, you are no longer dependent on being good. You are no longer trapped in the saint identity. You no longer need to perform moral perfection. And when you no longer need to perform, guilt loses its grip, because guilt thrives on the fantasy that you must remain pure. Purity is not wholeness. Purity is denial. The psyche does not seek purity. It seeks totality, and totality includes shadow. In this stage, you may begin to experience dreams where you meet a darker version of yourself. Perhaps you see yourself dressed in black, speaking coldly, walking away, refusing, or you may dream of a double, an identical person doing what you never allow yourself to do, or you may dream of entering a forbidden room. These symbols indicate the psyche is integrating the disowned parts. The double is the shadow. The forbidden room is the unconscious territory where your aggression and selfhood have been hidden. And when you enter that room consciously, you reclaim energy. This reclaimed energy is crucial, because much of your exhaustion was not caused by life, it was caused by repression. It takes tremendous psychic effort to remain nice when you are angry. It takes tremendous effort to smile when you want to leave. It takes tremendous effort to empathize when your instinct says danger. It takes tremendous effort to carry everyone and pretend you are fine. When the repression ends, the energy returns, not as excitement, but as steadiness. You feel more solid, you feel more real, you feel less drained by contact, you feel less invaded by other people's moods. This is not because you stopped caring, it is because you stopped merging. The integrated person does not merge, the integrated person relates. Now, what is the difference between merging and relating? Merging is when the boundary between self and other collapses. Their mood becomes your responsibility. Their disappointment becomes your emergency. Their needs become your command. Their suffering becomes your burden. Relating is when you can feel them without becoming them. You can witness them without absorbing them. You can care without collapsing. You can love without disappearing. This is why the final transformation of kindness is so extraordinary. Kindness becomes cleaner. It becomes simpler. It becomes quiet. It does not need to be seen. It does not need to be praised. It does not demand gratitude. It is no longer transactional. And because it is clean, it does not create resentment. It does not create self-hatred. It does not create exhaustion. It becomes a natural expression of the self. But to reach this stage, you must pass a final test, the test of disappointing the world and surviving it. For the guilt-driven person, the greatest fear is not abandonment in itself, but abandonment combined with self-blame. They fear being left and believing they deserve it. They fear being criticized and believing they are truly bad. This is why guilt is so powerful. It makes criticism feel like truth. It makes rejection feel like verdict. It makes conflict feel like moral condemnation. So the psyche must teach you something new. Other people's reactions are not your identity. This is liberation. When someone is angry, you do not become guilty. When someone is disappointed, you do not become bad. When someone withdraws, you do not become worthless. When someone judges you, you do not collapse into shame. You remain yourself. You remain centered. This is what it means to have an inner authority. And once you have this authority, you will notice an astonishing change. Many of the people who once controlled you with guilt will lose interest in controlling you. Some will leave. Some will become distant. Some will attempt one final manipulation and then disappear. And you will feel pain, yes, but you will also feel relief. Because the relationship was never truly mutual, it was a system, and systems break when one person stops playing their role. Now something else happens. As you stop being guilt-driven, you begin attracting different people. People who respect boundaries, people who do not require you to perform, people who do not demand endless explaining, people who can tolerate conflict, people who can face their own shadow, people who do not use your kindness as an excuse to remain immature. This new world may feel unfamiliar at first. Because it is calm, many guilt-driven people are addicted to emotional intensity. They think intensity equals love because their nervous system was trained in chaotic environments, so calm intimacy may feel boring, even suspicious. But calm intimacy is often the first sign of real safety. This is the moment you realize love does not demand self-abandonment. Love does not require you to fear guilt. Love does not punish your boundaries. Love does not force you to sacrifice your selfhood. True love supports individuation. True love welcomes truth. True love wants you to be whole, not useful. And finally, you reach a point where you can look back at your old self with compassion. Not shame, not contempt, compassion. You see the child who became kind to survive. You see the strategy that once saved you. You see the noble attempt to create belonging, and you bless it. You do not need to destroy it with hatred. You simply outgrow it, because the goal is not to become cruel. The goal is not to become indifferent. The goal is to become free. Freedom means you can be kind without fear. You can love without guilt. You can give without losing yourself. You can say no without collapsing. You can walk away without self-hatred. You can disappoint someone and still remain a good person, not in the moral sense, but in the human sense, a real person. This is the harsh truth Jung would offer you. Guilt-based kindness is not spiritual maturity. It is psychological bondage, and the soul will eventually rebel against bondage. Because the soul does not want to be good. The soul wants to be whole. So if you find yourself in this irreversible phase where your old softness no longer feels pure, where your patience feels like betrayal, where your kindness feels like a chain, do not panic. You are not losing your heart. You are finding yourself, and the self is always harsher than the persona at first, because the self must cut through illusion. But beyond that harshness lies a deeper tenderness, tenderness that does not abandon you. And when you are finally loyal to yourself, guilt transforms into something quieter and truer. It no longer screams. It no longer controls. It becomes conscious again, simple, precise, honest. It says, do not betray yourself. It says, do not abandon your soul. It says, do not call fear love. It says, do not call bondage kindness. It says, be whole. So, and in that wholeness, kindness returns not as a trap, but as a blessing that flows from a living center.